Hey, it's JP Morgan here on the Slanted Lens. We're out here in the woods and I found this random person standing here and I think they're gonna help me take pictures and illustrate high-speed sync. Hi, what's your name?
Hi, I'm Kellum.
You're gonna help me take some pictures?
Sure.
All right, great. Let's look at high-speed sync versus an ND filter. Which is better? Do they work the same? Are they as easy to work with? Or does the ND filter work at all? Let's take a look at those two next here on the Slanted Lens. Let's get going. Hey, come back, come back. First off, high-speed sync is when you're trying to match a bright background to a subject you brought into the shade and you're lighting with a strobe. And you want to be at 2.8. You want to be wide open so that background falls way out of focus. I don't want harsh sunlight on her face, so I brought her into the shade. So I've got 2.8, my subject in the shade, and now I turn my strobe on to light her face. At 200th of a second, I can't make the background dark enough. It's just too blown out at 2.8. So when I set my strobe and my trigger to high-speed sync, I can now move my shutter past 200th of a second. But it does create some issues. High-speed sync cuts the power down on your strobe. The strobe is not near as powerful when you go to high-speed sync because it's having to pulse and just not near as powerful. So I want to see if I go back to a neutral density filter, turn it off from high-speed sync, if that strobe light power coming up is equivalent now to the sunlight I've got in the background, and I can balance them just using an ND filter by bringing everything down so I can expose at 2.8. So let's take a look at those. Let's test those two, high-speed sync versus an ND filter. Let's get started, see what we got. So I'm on high-speed sync now. My strobe setting in the background is at 1/2. So at 1/2, at 2.8, at 4,000th of a second, the background is really dark, it's too dark. So I'm now gonna have to go, I'm gonna move my shutter to 2,000th of a second, but what's gonna happen is her face is gonna get too bright. So I'm gonna have to dial my strobe down to 1/4 from 1/2. And here we go, another shot. That background's a little brighter than before. Not a lot, but a little bit. So now I'm gonna go up another stop. I'm gonna go to 1,000th of a second. And I'm gonna dial my strobe down another stop. I'm gonna go to an 1/8, where we started, 1,000th of a second at 8. That's very nice. The background looks really nice, but I think I could go up to 500th of a second. But I'm gonna now have to dial my strobe down to a 16th. Oh, that's looking very nice back there. If I wanna go even further, I'm gonna go to 200th of a second. And that 200th of a second, I'm gonna now dial this strobe down to 32nd. Well, that's very pretty. That's very pretty. It's a little bright on her face. I'll bring it down just a little bit. I'll go to 32 minus 1/2. That's starting to look very pretty. She's got a nice rich background. Her face looks like the right intensity. But I can even open that more. I'm gonna go to 200th of a second. This is all on high-speed sync. So I'm now going to 100th of a second, but I'm gonna have to dial my strobe down. Now that background's got nice and airy and bright back there. You can decide which one of these you like, but the principle is here that in high-speed sync, you have to dial your strobe up or down depending on which way you go with your shutter. If you make your shutter longer, giving more light to the background, it gives more light to her face, so you're gonna have to dial the strobe down. So there's my first shot using the ND filter. I'm at 3 stops of ND. I'm at 2.8 still for my aperture. My shutter's at 200th of a second, which is as fast as I can go to be able to sync with the strobes because it's not on high-speed sync now. And my strobe power is at 25%. So 25% of strobe power. I get a nice image there. Now from here, I can only do one of two things. I can give myself less ND, which means I'm going to take one stop away, which is going to make everything brighter because it's affecting both the strobe and the ambient sunlight the same. So they're both very bright. I'm going to go from 1/4 power. I'm going to dial this down to even less than that. It's going to be like a 12th of the power. So it's going to be really low. Let me just take that another shot there. So the background got a little brighter because I went from 3 stops to 2 stops of ND, which allowed the sunlight to be brighter in the background. Then I had to dial my strobe power down because her face got brighter. And it looks excellent. Now I could go the other way. I could go to 4 stops of ND. That's gonna make the background much darker, but now I'm gonna have to dial my strobe up from a 1/12 of the power setting to 1/2. I'm gonna have to go from 12 to 24 to 50%. So there I am at 3 stops of ND. I balanced the foreground and the background. It looks great. If I wanted the background to be brighter, I'm gonna go down to basically 2 stops of ND. So my background got brighter because I went from 3 stops to 2 stops. I had to cut my power in half to keep her face exposed properly. If I now go down to 1 stop of ND, then I'm gonna have to cut my power in half again. Yeah, it's not quite as bright as I'd like on her face. I cut the power in half. I'm maybe get just a little extra here. But you get the point. The point of the matter is the ND is going to affect both the power of the strobe, it's going to make it darker or brighter, as well as the background. So it's very easy. I'm just simply changing the ND filter to give myself more or less exposure. And when I do that though now, I've got to change the power on my strobe to compensate. So if I give less exposure to the background, that means it gave my strobe less exposure, so I've got to dial it up so I'll get a correct exposure on her face. If I give more exposure to the background, that means I'm letting more light in through my ND filter. That means I'm letting more light in on my strobe head. I've got to dial that strobe head down or her face is going to be too bright. So it's just a balancing act between the ambient light in the background and the power of the strobe in the foreground, making sure that you get a nice exposure on her face and the background is as bright or as dark as you want it. So there's a look at ND filters versus high-speed sync. I have always said that that just doesn't work, that ND filters don't work. I stand corrected, I truly do. I love it when I do one of these things and I learn something, because I really have learned something today. Because when you go to high-speed sync, it kills the amount of power from your strobes. It's because they're having to pulse, you don't get as much power out of the strobes. So when you take it off high-speed sync, you get that power back, and now you use it to match your strobe power to the ambient, and you can get them to balance. It's a balancing act on both of them, either high-speed sync or ND filter. You got to balance them a little bit to get them to work. But I was very surprised at how easily it worked and how well, it looked incredible using an ND filter. But I think everyone should carry an ND filter all the time because it helps you unlock the entire capability of the exposure triangle and a tripod as well. If you don't have those two things with you, you're in trouble. You can't, well, let's say you're not in trouble. Your images are all going to look the same. So thank you for listening. Leave some comments below. Tell me how much of a dope I've been, because I haven't explored this in the past. So keep those cameras rolling. Keep on clicking. If you want better information about high-speed sync, go to the video we have on high-speed sync. It'll help you understand it more fully, kind of a complete lesson about high-speed syncing. This is quickly going over the two of them to see how they work and how they each work in the same situation, but that video just talks about high-speed sync.